Welcome back to the Not Yet Adults podcast. What? This, of course, is a podcast starring Collin Geffrey and myself, Eric Zayas, as we navigate adulthood and discuss the variety of topics that we come up with and how they relate to our lives and how they've affected us and how that's changed over the years as we've grown from little children to full-grown adults.
I mean, full-grown adults is a little far. I'd say we're fully grown children. It's probably the
That's
best.
the most accurate.
Yeah, best way to say it. But I mean, we're getting there, step by step, day by day.
We're trying.
We're getting closer. Yeah.
How have you been doing, Colin?
I'm doing well, Eric. I'm kind of getting into a good balance, I suppose, between sort of the job search and not wanting to I don't know, freak out and hit someone because job searching can be so frustrating. So I'm kind of treading that line a little bit.
I'm right with you.
Done. Yeah, it's searching for a job is a full-time job, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So it's hard because at least with a full-time job, when you're done, you clock on, you clock off, and then that's that. But with job searching, there's always more you can do. You're never done. So it's kind of frustrating, especially if you're the kind of personality like me, where you make a list that you want to get this stuff done in the day, and with job searching, there's always more on the list, so it can be kind of frustrating. However, Eric, in the midst of job searching and all of this wonderful thing, I just get so stressed. And one thing I do to relieve stress is I sit down and I play me some video games. We're 23 episodes deep in this lovely little podcast, and we have not properly talked about video games yet, which I think is a travesty, personally. So today, let's just jump in, man. Let's do it. Let's get down and dirty with video games.
Where to begin with such a topic? I guess we could start with talking about how we first got into video games as little boys. For you, Colin, what are your original kind of experiences with gaming?
So I can't promise this was the very first time, but it was certainly up there. I had this family friend, was a good friend of my mom's, and she had a son a few years older than me. His name was Brandon. And Brandon, whenever he showed up anywhere, I was probably about 3, would have a Game Boy with him. And I wasn't familiar with Game Boys, but he would frickin' play it everywhere he walked. And this is at a time before people had smartphones or anything, so it was kind of strange to walk around looking at a screen all the time.
Do you know what year this was? Can you remember?
This is probably, I'm going to say 2001-ish.
Okay.
And he was just always playing the latest, greatest Pokemon game on his Game Boy Color. That's just how he rolled. And I never really played it, but I was aware of him always being on it to a point that it was kind of isolating, and it kind of drove a rift between him and his mom and him and us, I guess, because we were always trying to have conversation and he was just in his game. And so I think he had also, that's too early for World of Warcraft. He got really deep into World of Warcraft later. And that was something else, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyways, he was really, really into games, and that had driven a wedge between him and his mom. And so his mom had told my mom, because I was 3 or 4, don't get video games. Don't introduce it to your kids. You will regret it. It's going to be the worst thing in the world.
Oh, boy.
And so a lot of baggage going into the whole gaming thing.
Yeah.
And I don't really know why, but my mom, I think when I was 4 for Christmas, yeah, that sounds right, about 4, she got us the original Xbox, which was pretty new at the time. And then my grandfather, he loved games for a long time. He used to play Space Invaders and Galaga and stuff. And they had a GameCube over there, so he got us a Nintendo GameCube. And so we got both for Christmas, and it was we were lower middle class. So she was like, you can keep one of these. We don't need both of these. So we went with the original Xbox, and me and my dad sat down in front of the TV in the family room, I'll always remember it, and we played Star Wars: The Clone Wars. And this was the 2002 game or whatever. And that was such a cool experience for me because I loved Star Wars so much. And I liked my dad, but I've never really had that much in common with my dad. I'd say I have way more in common now with my dad than I did back then. And so it would always feel like the type of movies he watched and the stuff he did. And obviously he was always at work. We didn't really have much to bond over. And video games became our bonding thing. He and I could go play video games together. And that was I mentioned kind of going into that with all that baggage of our family friend being like, never frickin' buy games ever. It's gonna be the worst thing. But that was kind of like a activity we could do together. Like me and my dad would sit there in the family room playing together. My sister, who was just a baby, would be nearby. My mom would be in the kitchen. My mom's always said she liked sort of that feeling of having people in the other room excited doing stuff together. And like even now, as we're much older, she'll always be like, "Hey, do you guys just want to play a video game in the family room tonight?" And she'll just hang out on the couch or in the kitchen or whatever. But she just liked being around it. And so it's I think more often than not, at least in my case, been a very positive thing. It kind of brings the family together and just gives us a reason to hang out and do something. In fact, my dad and I right now are doing a playthrough of The Last of Us because I wanted forever to play The Last of Us with him, but I never had a PlayStation 3 or 4. I always played it at my friend's houses, and now I finally have a PS4. And so he's doing his playthrough of The Last of Us, and I'm watching him, and it's been so cool.
Fantastic. That's such a good game. And that's also a really good. It's one of those games that's like, even if you're not playing, it's fun to watch someone else play.
Yeah. Well, and those like moments, those like absolute mic drop moments that game has are just like holy crap. And it's been really cool. I my only issue with it is I think he still is treating it too much as a game and less as like an experience. And so like there'll be a conversation that's like really big, and I'm like, so what do you think? And he's like, honestly, I wasn't listening. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's The Last of Us. You have to listen. Like, come on. But anyways, but no, that's kind of how I began my gaming journey, and from Xbox came my own Game Boy eventually, and then from there I built my own PC, and now I'm one of these PC gaming snobs. But that's kind of how I started my journey. What about you, Eric? How did you join this great world that is video gaming?
Yeah, when I was a young boy, I think I might have been 5, and so would have been like 1999. Actually, I think before even this, like when I was in like preschool, so like 1998, I occasionally I like half went to preschool, like half the days I went to preschool, and the other half, my mom dropped me off at my cousin's house, and they also lived like nearby. They used to, now they live in a totally different state. But um, it was funny when I remember being in the back of the big like blue minivan we used to have, and there was like a certain road she would drive down, and when she turned left, I knew that meant we were going to preschool, and I would immediately start like crying and whining about it. And then when she turned right, I knew that meant I was gonna go hang out with my cousins, and that meant that I was gonna play some Super Nintendo and have a good time with them, Super Mario Bros. 3 and things of that nature, and just hanging around with them. That like it was just a fun time. And so I think that was my earliest experience with video games. And then my mom got me a big purple Game Boy Color, and I got Super Mario Bros. On it, and it was the first game I ever finished. I remember the last level, the last like Bowser Castle. I finished that in, I think it was in a TJ Maxx or some clothing store. I was like I played that game pretty constantly, but because as I get closer to the end, I played it more and more frequently, and like I was glued to that thing. You could not get me off. And so I was like following my mom into the clothing store because she took me there and she was getting stuff. And I basically found one of those, what do you call it? It's one of those stands they have where they have a bunch of clothes around in a circle. And if you're a kid, you can crawl into the middle and hide them. And I went there and I hid there, and I finished the last level. And it was like, it was such an accomplishment for me, even though nowadays it's like, oh, that's an easy game.
I wonder how many kids have that like exact story of like going into the middle of the clothes thing and hiding to play their Game Boy while their mom was shopping. Because I literally did the exact same thing.
I think I was in there for a bit, and my mom was probably like worried because I was missing. And I don't remember specifically, but I bet when she found me, she yelled at me. But it didn't matter because I saved Peach. Yeah, and then over the years, like I think I got Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. I never completed that game. There's not many games I've completed, at least especially when I was younger, because I didn't have the patience to see things to the end.
Also, like I was a lot of my time was spent on an original Xbox. That's a little bit later than you, but like games used to be way freaking harder than they are now. Like now games are made to be finished more or less, and obviously there's exceptions, but like games back in the day, they didn't have the space or the bandwidth to make games as big as they are today. So to make them longer and take more time, they just made them way freaking harder. And so as a kid, you'd be sitting there scratching your head, not understanding how to do this. I our original Xbox sadly broke a few years back, but every now and again I would go back and play these old games that stumped me as a kid, and I'm like, these are still freaking hard. Like it's insane. And anyway, just a quick aside, but yeah, games they don't make them like that anymore. They used to be almost prohibitively hard.
A few years ago, I played the original Legend of Zelda on a Legend of Zelda collection disc for the GameCube, and the OG Legend of Zelda game. Today's gamers can't finish that without a walkthrough. At least I couldn't. It's one of those games where it's like,
You have to like go to this exact place and place a bomb and open the secret thing. And
yeah, it's not like modern Legend of Zelda games where it's like do this thing and then like like there's no. It's very hard to like lose like the direction of the quest you're going on. The original Legend of Zelda, you just dropped in a world and it's like here's a wooden sword, good luck, and then you just figure it out. And like there's not a lot of dialogue. There's no dialogue pretty much. Well, there's a few bits of dialogue, but very sparingly. And there's not any dialogue that says like here's where you go to next. You just kind of have to like it's like a mystery. It's like it's not really intended to be a mystery, but it's a mystery of like what to do next and where to go.
it's almost like an extension of like early text adventure games of like figuring out not necessarily what to do, but how to do it or how to say what you're trying to do is the experience. It's not just getting it done. It's like figuring out, okay, I know that this is what I need to get done. How do I actually go about doing that?
And I think that element of gaming and like figuring things out and the satisfaction you get from figuring things out is why I like certain like puzzle games like The Witness, which is a modern example, is such a great game because again you're dropped in a place you're not really told or instructed what to do and you just have to figure out like you're presented with puzzles you are originally presented with the simplest version of a puzzle and then you figure out how to do the puzzle just by like messing around with the controls and then as you go like once the game knows that you know how to solve the puzzles then it's like okay well like can you solve this version of the puzzle and it's very complicated and like you keep going and it's really satisfying. But yeah, over the years I like got a variety of different consoles. GameCube is probably my favorite because of the games on there. Like I just like the design of it, the controllers. There's something about like not only do I think a lot of really good games are on that console, but there's something about like the GameCube. It just feels like for me the quintessential game console. And then yeah, over the years I kind of like have been playing less and less nowadays because of all the responsibilities, but I've been trying to get back into that now that I have a little more free time.
So we kind of talked about how we got into games and some of those early memories. What's it like now? I mean, you just mentioned sort of alluding to the fact that maybe you don't play as much as you like to. How often are you able to play games now? Has your reasons for playing games changed? Has it kind of stayed the same? What's that like in modern day for you?
Well, it's hard for me to keep up with games because there's so many coming out, and like every new game seems like a huge, big experience. And it's like when a new big movie comes out, and like there's like a bunch of it gets a bunch of awards, and everyone's like, "Have you watched this movie? Have you seen it?" And it's for me, I can't. Well, honestly, it's probably easier. It's to keep up with like movies and stuff because they're a shorter experience. But as far as with video games, you're paying a lot for them, so they're expensive. But also, they're like the experience is meant to last you like weeks, and that's if you're playing it pretty regularly. And I just can't really. I don't know. I just don't have. It's not necessarily that I don't have the patience for it. It's just that I have like it's not as high of a priority to play a game nowadays, which is for the best, as it is to hang out with friends or to like go to work obviously to figure out like life and stuff. I video games and all of that stuff as a kid, it was just a natural part of life. It was like breathing, it was like eating, whereas nowadays I just see it as like a distraction and sometimes like a waste of time. Like I'll play if I'm nowadays if I play a game up late and I have to work the next day, like the next day I'm like, oh god, I shouldn't have done that. Like I associate playing a video game up late with like not getting enough sleep and having a harder time at work. Whereas when I was a kid, I would just, I would regret it. I'd be like, no regrets, I'm going to play a game until it's 3 in the morning, maybe even later.
Well, and when you're a kid, I mean, it's a time sink almost going back to sort of the analogy I made with the job, searching, it's sort of this black hole of just whatever time I can throw at the games I'm going to. And no matter how much you get, it's never enough. It's very scary as a kid, especially if you have any sort of like an addictive personality. Like it's very easy to get just freaking hooked on a game. So that's all you talk about or think about or want to do. I remember when I started Pokemon, I was especially that way. But it's fun to game and it's still enjoyable, but at this point in our lives, it's really hard to make that a priority. And even when you do sit down, you're playing a game you really like, it's hard not to have that voice in the back of your head of like, I really should be doing another job application, or I really should just go outside or go spend some time with some friends or hang out with my family or whatever. It's really hard to put games first.
Yeah, and it's also like when you're a kid, like for example with like junk food or candy, you are told by your parents, not to eat it because it's bad for you, and then you think like as a kid, okay, I, I can't eat this because it's being kept from me. But when I'm an adult and I have more responsibilities, I'll eat whatever I want, whenever I want. And then when you get to, and this is something we've talked about in previous episodes, but when you get to that adult age, you think about it and you're like, yes, I have the freedom to eat what I want and do what I want, but I also have the, knowledge and experiences to know that I really shouldn't, and my parents are right. And this thing that I want, I shouldn't have because it's bad for me. And I feel like that's true with video games too, where it's like, yeah, I could play games a lot more often, but it's not a good idea, as opposed to doing things that would better me and like move me forward in life more.
Usually, in my experience, you have to go to bed with a stomach ache from eating too much candy and ice cream to learn that lesson a couple times. Like you need to have that experience of you were up till 4 a.m. playing a game and you had work the next morning, and you have to learn the hard way of like, okay, I need to manage my time better. I need to sort out priorities. But gosh darn if that's not the most fun thing in the world in the moment when you're just staying up all night with a game you love. Yeah. As far as my relationship with games goes, I mean, it's very similar. I think you pretty much touched on almost everything I wanted to say. The only thing I'd throw out there is, since I started doing YouTube and Twitch, my relationship with games has changed. There's, there's the joke of PC gamers on Steam is you buy a game on Steam and then just never freaking play it, because the games are so cheap. And that's true. I have a bunch of games I have never even touched. But for me, I'll always see a game or read about a game, and I'll buy it with the intention of doing a YouTube series or a Twitch series or whatever. And the problem with that is it takes time and it takes work and it takes arrangement and planning and editing and all of that. And so that more often than not has become my relationship with games. It's a greater good. I'm gonna make content out of this as opposed to just sitting down and playing it. And on the one hand, that makes it a little easier to justify spending time on it, but on the other hand, it's like if you go hang out with friends as a way to relax and sort of just vent and chill out, and then suddenly you got paid to do that or you had to make that your job or whatever, it would totally change your relationship with it because you can't use that as your outlet anymore. And in some ways, that's the way video games have become for me. And I don't get paid for YouTube or Twitch, but having to think about it from that mindset as opposed to just sort of doing it because you want to.
Yeah, it's turning something that's just a source of entertainment into like a job, and you can't really. It can't really be something that's fully recreational anymore, I would imagine.
Right. And the last few months, I've made a point to just every now and again, like Spider-Man PS4 was that game for me, where I'm like, I'm not making content about this game. I'm not, playing this at any pace except my own. I'm just playing this to have fun, and that was a really cool experience. But yeah, it's as you mentioned, as we get older, it's hard. It's hard to sit down and just play that game, or that idea of I freaking miss this so much, man. Of like that playground game that everybody's playing at the same time, and you go to the playground and you're talking with your friends about, and this is the secret I did, and oh, this is the thing I did if you hit this button combination, and it's all freaking bullcrap. Every single thing that people said was bullcrap, but it was so much fun to just have that experience. For me in school, it was Pokemon Fire Red. I swear to God, every kid, boy and girl in my class, was playing Fire Red and Leaf Green. And you'd go to school every day, and like I had the link cable so I could link our Game Boys, so I was the coolest freaking kid because I could do that. And you'd battle and trade. No one knew what they were talking about, but everyone was enjoying it. And that's just such a fun experience, man. I miss that so much.
I don't think I've had that experience where everyone was playing a game with like secrets that they would share each other, but I do remember when I used to live in Spanaway. I lived in a cul-de-sac, and I was friends with like I don't really hang out with my neighbors anymore, but back when I was a child, I was friends with my neighbors that lived directly across the street and friends with other neighbors that lived farther in the cul-de-sac. And I had Super Smash Bros. I think it was the original one for the Nintendo 64, and it was the classic gaming experience that I think Nintendo, of all the different game companies, does the best. Where I would have friends come over, and they'd all bring their like controllers, and we'd all play intense Super Smash Bros. Like fights. And some like there's a variety. There's some kids that were like not very good, and there's some kids, mostly other kids, the older kids especially, were like masters.
And Smash, people take seriously too. Like
It was really intense, and it was like a really enjoyable experience because it's like the camaraderie and the, I guess, connectedness I felt was none other.
yeah, I would argue, and I myself am mostly game on PC, and I'm definitely a Sony fanboy, but I would argue Nintendo does that better almost than anyone else. Is having that game that you can just share with everyone, whether it's Pokemon or Smash or Breath of the Wild. How social of a game that was. Everyone was talking about their story or their experience. I think Nintendo's really leagues ahead as far as that goes.
And also because like they still kind of promote that like peer-to-peer gameplay, whereas like with Xbox and Sony and with PC games, it's very much like you play in most cases by yourself in a room, and you only play with other people online. Even if it's your friends, you're like still playing from each other's houses, like even if you live next to each other. But with Nintendo, like with the commercials and with their marketing and with their functionality of their consoles, it's really still promotes like meeting with people and like playing games like in the same room together. Even as like the commercials with the Switch when it came out, you'd see like young adults and like 20 somethings at a party where they're like playing basketball or something, and then they stop and they're playing like a racing game on Switch together.
Sort of say what you will about it now after the fact, but that was what was so special about Pokemon Go for that 2-3 week period of it came out, and the game was so obtuse and held your hand so little and didn't tell you so many things that you needed to know, that the way you learned was walking up to people on the street that were also playing, and they would tell you, oh, well, if you curve the Pokeball, it does this, or this kind of Pokemon showing up downtown, or whatever. It was such a social experience of you have to talk to other people, and that's kind of going away in an era where games hold your hand more. And there's 1,000 walkthroughs online for everything you can imagine within the first week of a game coming out. We're kind of losing that magic of just getting lost in a game and having to figure it out with other people. That's, I feel like, kind of a dying concept in a lot of ways. So Eric, we talked about how we started with games. We talked about sort of what we're playing now and how our relationship with games has changed. I don't know if you know this, but video games sort of have this stigma around them that they're just evil, violent simulators that are teaching our kids evil things and poisoning the minds of our youth.
And also just like video games are seen as this sort of like really immature, childish experience, and kind of seen as like junk food of the mind.
Right. And it's frustrating. You and I'd say, are not members of the video game industry, but we're connoisseurs of video games, I'd say. It's frustrating when the outside's looking in on gamers and video games sort of with this chip on their shoulder of, well, it's not really movies or TV or music. It's like video games are just kind of off on their own little island. And it's hard, I feel like, when you have these amazing, not games, they are pieces of art. When you look at, The Last of Us, that is a freaking piece of art. When you look at, Mass Effect to a certain extent, when you look at Gone Home, when you look at Coming Out Simulator, these games that are art.
Or like something like The Witness, or like Shadow of the Colossus, which is a really classic. It's. I think video games are not just art in the sense that it's beautiful visuals rendered in 3D environments most of the time.
It's a way to disrupt people's minds and evoke opinions and thoughts and ideas in a way that other mediums can't, because it's interactive.
It's interactive is the key element that differentiates this medium from any other kind of medium, to make it more of just a passive experience and more of an active experience. And I think that has a lot of, obviously it has a lot to say. It has a lot of potential, makes it sound like it's a new thing that we're just discovering. But it's I think feel bad whenever I see someone criticize video games in a certain way, because I like to think like if they would just like give um, certain games a chance, that they if they could see what I see when I play a game or certain games, I think like that their mind would change a lot. But like you have games like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, and those are fine games of themselves, but they're kind of the like target when people point out that games are dangerous and games are like immature. They're like the low hanging fruit where you look at them and you're like, oh yeah, well look at this game, like this is a really popular game and this is obviously a bad game.
Meanwhile, GTA 5 is the most successful selling piece of media of all time, which is freaking nuts. So, I mean, this is big note to end on, but like, do you think we ever get to a point as a society where video games are as accepted as a form of art and expression as movies and TV and music and books and all these things?
I think we're getting there, and I think game developers like Naughty Dog, who developed The Last of Us, and Telltale Games, I think it's called Project Red, that made The Witcher 3, which is like
CD Projekt Red, yeah.
Yeah, CD Project Red, exactly. They made The Witcher 3, which is a critically acclaimed video game experience. The more studios like that you can see them putting their heart and soul into their work, and they like pay extra attention to the details and to like the minutia little things that a lot of casual gamers wouldn't notice, but it makes all the difference. I think the more people we have doing that and making like incredible interactive experiences like those games, the sooner we'll get to a world where video games is a medium that's as respected as films or television or even literature.
And just think, man, think about where games were 20 years ago. Just think about how far we've come, and then think about how far I'm sure they'll be in another 20 years. I can only imagine. Like the potential, we're just scratching the surface of what it can do, I think.
I think they're video games because they're so like thoroughly embedded in technology, and technology evolves so quickly. I think video games are probably the quickest developing medium, whereas like literature, something for the most part has kind of stayed. I mean, like the written word has changed over the years, but the medium itself is still pretty similar to how you experience it. I think ebooks was the only real like change to the literature medium, but for video games, like just over 20 years have changed so drastically to where it's unrecognizable.
C.S. Lewis didn't run in and he's like, all right, guys, I got this brand new pen. It's going to totally change how we do writing. Like, yeah,
exactly.
That hasn't really happened. So, Eric, we kind of covered the gamut. I don't know how much justice you could do to video games in 30 minutes, but I think we did our best shot. Before we go, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't sort of give the honorable mention to each of our favorite games of all time. So what do you got for the folks at home? If you can make them play one game in this entire world, what do you have for them?
The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
Sure.
Come at me. I think it's the best Legend of Zelda game. I think it's the best video game experience. It's got beautiful style. It's got amazing music. I mean, it's a Legend of Zelda game. You can't go wrong with the music. And I think it's just... I played it at a time when I was a kid, when my imagination... the way it was like obviously a very childish imagination, and that game just like perfectly fed into that in such an amazing way. But not to take too much of your time, what would you say is your favorite game, Colin?
First of all, Wind Waker's wonderful. That's a great choice. My favorite game is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2: The Sith Lords, which was a RPG made by Obsidian and BioWare. That was about 2004, 2005 that came out. And that was, by today's standards, it probably looks pretty primitive, but that was the first time I had played a open world RPG. And that was like, to be a kid who was freaking obsessed with Star Wars, and like I always tell the story of I spent all my allowance renting the VHS for Empire Strikes Back from Hollywood Video, just over and over and over. Like I was so obsessed with Star Wars, and so to have a game that put me in the shoes of the last Jedi that was exiled from the Jedi Council, and just be like, okay, now go, you pick the adventure. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is your show. You do what you want. And I'm like, holy crap, my mind is blown. Yeah.
Nothing like the first time to have a new experience, but especially like with that high of a quality of an experience. Like, it's creates a standard that's hard to live up to.
It ruined games for me, man. I've never had that experience again. I don't get me wrong. I've played so many great games, but yeah, just to have that moment, it hit just at the right time in my life where I was just getting a little bit older and I was, starting to get into stuff with a little bit darker themes, and then here was this just amazing Star Wars game where I could do anything and say anything I wanted, and I was like, my God, I'm in love. This is incredible. But anyways, well, folks, that is what we've got to say about video games. Let us know. Give us a comment on the old YouTubes or SoundClouds or whatever, what your favorite game is of all time or what you think of the video game industry. And of course, this has been the Not Yet Adults podcast, which comes to you every Monday and Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you want to do us a solid, head on over to the social medias. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Not Yet Adults, as well as on our own subreddit, r/Not Yet Adults, which you can check out if you have the time. If you really want to do us a solid, and we would forever be in your debt, head on over, if you're on iOS, to Apple Podcasts or iTunes and give us a rating and a review there. It just takes a couple minutes out of your day, and it gives us a lot of help because it helps more people see the podcast, and we put a lot of work into this, so we sure would appreciate that. We'll be back this coming Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time talking about something new, and we're very much looking forward to it. So thanks for listening, and until next time, this has been Not Yet Adults.
Bye-bye.